Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. Today, I thought I'd share with you my favorite questline in WoW. It's nothing too unique, certainly not some obscure vanilla quest off the beaten path. In fact, it was part of the main campaign of a relatively recent expansion, Shadowlands. Yeah, I know some may scoff at the notion, but let's try to remember that zone quests are pretty much always good in WoW. Enough beating around the bush though. I'm talking about the leveling quest for Ardenweald, specifically the main chain involving Ysera. To fully appreciate the story here though, we first have to go back and cover the setup, and we begin that with simply understanding who Ysera is as a character and as an entity in Warcraft. And for most of us, she is, in reality, not a particularly deep character. That isn't meant as slander, but we simply didn't get a ton of exposure to her. To be clear, I'm speaking in-game exposure. It's entirely possible she gets a lot of focus in some books, but I haven't read most of them, and most players haven't either. In fact, the only book I've read that gives her any notable attention was War of the Scaleborn, but even there, she was really just part of the supporting cast. Alexstrasza and Neltharion were the only aspects given real focus there. So early in WoW's history, we mostly just got small tidbits about her. We knew she was the Dreamer, charged with guarding the Emerald Dream, and that she led the Green Dragonflight, and that she was often asleep. In fact, when we finally see her in-game for the first time in Dragonblight, she's just sleeping in the Emerald Dragon Shrine. Well, even that was probably just an ethereal version of her or something. She gets more exposure in Cataclysm, where she participates in the defense of Nordrassil and Hyjal against the forces of Ragnaros. But she didn't really do much. For the most part, she was just sort of channeling at the Well of Eternity. She technically took a more active role in the Dragon Soul raid, but merely as part of the ensemble of aspects, not really doing anything to stand out herself. Heck, even her design at this point was mostly just a palette swap of Alexstrasza. And Alexstrasza's design at this point was mostly a palette swap of Sylvanas. And that's really all we got until Legion. So fundamentally, for a huge chunk of players, Ysera was just a powerful, kind-hearted dragon with an attractive visage form whose defining characteristic was that she slept a lot. She's just a sleepy little thing. And though I don't think that shallow view of her is itself a good thing, it did easily put her in the position of being something precious that we must protect. Heck, until Dragonflight rolled around, it was enough to make Ysera easily my favorite aspect. Q Legion, specifically Val'sharah. Xavius is doing his usual nightmare shenanigans and corrupting Shaladdrassil, the Dream, and half the forest. Malfurion is on the case though, and things are looking to be in control at least. Cenarius has fallen ill as a result of the corruption, but we're working on it. Ysera sends us to retrieve the Tears of Elune, which was in fact one of the 5 pillars of creation we needed to collect for Khadgar in the first place. Whoops, Xavius was one step ahead of us and already stole the Tears. Thus, we were unable to stop Cenarius from being absorbed into the Emerald Nightmare and falling to its corruption. Seeing this, Malfurion storms off with a vengeance, only to get captured himself. Ysera manages to locate him, and as she's rushing in to save him, we get one of the most despair-inducing cutscenes ever. Xavius shoots the Tears of Elune, which he had already corrupted, into the heart of Ysera, causing her to plummet to the earth and become corrupted herself. Now, I'm not saying he's the only person at fault here, but nice going, Malfurion. We spend the rest of the main Val'sharah story chasing Tyrande around as she searches for her husband, and it's pretty annoying, but at least memeable. We don't get a ton of Ysera even here. She has a few generic lines that anybody corrupted by the Nightmare might spout off. Eventually, Xavius presents Tyrande with a dilemma. Focus on saving Malfurion, or saving the Temple of Elune from an attack by Nightmare Ysera. She chooses the latter, and, with no way to purify the aspect, puts her down. Finally free, Ysera's spirit is lifted into the sky by Elune, and made into a constellation. Which doesn't really make sense, but feels very Greek mythology inspired. And the whole scene is very sad, of course. She wasn't nearly as important of a character as Varian or Vol'jin, whom we just lost, and had even less story presence than Tyrion. But for a lot of players, her death was the real gut punch of 7.0. Someone pure, innocent, and unsullied by being given any actual attention from the writers had been taken away from us. And the worst part of it all was we never even got to see like a sexy nightmare visage form Ysera doing sexy evil things. I mean, it's probably for the best narrative-wise, but still. And that was where Ysera's story ended. For a while. Jump ahead to Shadowlands, and we received the Afterlives shorts. Though Ysera does not feature in these, the Ardenweald one does show us Ursoc, who had been corrupted by the Nightmare and put down shortly after Ysera. He has taken the form of a wild seed, destined to be nurtured until he is born into Ardenweald, and eventually, down the line, reborn into Azeroth. Except the whole anima drought is happening and the Night Fae have to sacrifice certain groves to allow others to live, and that means Ursoc is getting sacrificed, giving us what was seemingly the first perma-destruction of the soul in Warcraft. Now those are some heavy stakes. Granted, it's WoW. Death can always be made to merely be a setback if Blizzard feels like it, and we've gotten at least some minor clues that, in fact, a Shadowlands death may not be the true death. But the point is, characters in Ardenweald are in danger, especially wild seeds that cannot do anything for themselves. So with our precious Ysera having been returned to the cycle of life and death, and with prospective permadeath on the table, we begin our Ardenweald campaign. And if I haven't said so before, let me say so here. Ardenweald has some incredible design to it. I mean, the zone itself is gorgeous, of course. A lot of Shadowlands zones are. But especially the whole culture of the Night Fae, which is heavily inspired by fairy folklore. The whole zone screams A Midsummer Night's Dream. I mean, you have literal fairies, as well as Fawn, or as WoW calls them, Sylvar. You've got a culture that encourages pranks and theater productions and parades. Heck, you're even warned to stay on the main road, lest you be waylaid by a trickster Spriggan. It's a wonderful environment they built, and while some might argue it doesn't fit WoW, I say their opinions don't matter, this is great, and it actively enhances the quest we're about to get into. Speaking of which, it's impressed upon us pretty early on how much the anima drought is wreaking havoc on Ardenweald. Wild seeds and entire groves need to be sacrificed so that others may survive, and, on top of all that, we've got the Drust invading and corrupting the Night Fae residents. It's not terribly far into questing that we first encounter Ysera's wild seed, and it is, at least at first, kept somewhat cryptic just who is inside. Granted, it was pretty widely spoiled in the community beforehand that Ysera was coming back, so unfortunately it was hard to be surprised. And frankly, even if you didn't know, the hints aren't all that subtle. One of the fairies, Dreamweaver, informs us that it had arrived just before the drought started, and that it met a violent end, which already starts to narrow it down. We go off to do various tasks around the zone, and return to where the seed was being kept in Tir Naval, to find certain nightmares are attacking. Nightmares of a certain bright red hue. Yes, curious. Anyway, after we deal with those, we're charged with escorting this wild seed south to Hibernal Hollow, where Droman Alioth will be able to help us. And accompanying us down there is Naya, a Sylvar that I'm particularly fond of since she's voiced by Jeremy Lee, who has one of my favorite voices in the industry. Once we make it to the Hollow, we set about infusing the wild seed with more anima, though it proves to be a difficult task indeed. Aside from the sheer anima problem are the nightmares that Ysera is experiencing. We're shown visions of her life, including her family, friends, her not friends, and Neltharion's betrayal. If after all this you somehow magically hadn't connected the dots, we're then explicitly sent back to the Val'sharah conclusion, this time from Ysera's perspective, as you're forced to attack the Temple of Elune. You can, amusingly, kill a past version of yourself here. Quite easily, in fact. Though sadly, you can't really do any damage to Tyrande. But this is the point in the questing where she starts to be overtly referred to as Ysera. Once we're through that and manage to fend off yet another attack from the Drust, we get to one of my favorite singular quests in the game, Dying Dreams, or, as many may better know it, the Forest Procession. We and our friends are determined to save Ysera. After all, we've been looking after her throughout the whole quest chain, protecting her, nurturing her, literally pushing her around in a cradle. The desire to save her has, in a sense, unified us all, and so we choose to bring her to the Winter Queen for some divine intervention. Leading the procession is Alioth, the big blue glowy bear, which is just a nice visual to lead the march with. Also accompanying us are Dreamweaver, Arelon, the Sylvar from the Afterlives, Naya, and Lady Moonberry. Moonberry's inclusion is my favorite here. She was the first person we met upon arriving in the zone, and frankly, she's one of my favorite Shadowlands original characters. I love how she's like this adorable little prankster, but one of the highest authorities around, and lesser in power to basically only the Winter Queen herself. Moonberry starts off the parade, reminding us that she said our voice was but one bird singing into the night, and that it's time they all sing with us. We then head toward the heart of the forest. The dialogue has ceased, and we're simply left with some beautiful music. And as we draw closer, more and more Night Fae join around the procession. They all wish to save her. They all need us to save her. We then get to the Awaken the Dreamer quest and cinematic, and I must say, it hits incredibly hard. I feel like WoW story moments, at least in recent years, tend not to have a ton of buildup, but this one did. In a sense, it stretched all the way back to Legion, but at the very least, the entirety of Ardenweald so far, which was constructed to get us to this point. It truly felt like a culmination of both the narrative and our emotions. In many ways, this felt like the reverse of her death cinematic. I mean, obviously it's her being reborn, even if it's within the realm of death, but even the music was essentially a variation on the same track, though this time it shifts into something far more triumphant as Ysera manifests and lets out a mighty roar that sends Lady Moonberry flying backward. Our precious dragon immediately composes herself though, landing before her benefactor, the Winter Queen, and kneeling in gratitude. And I don't even like the Winter Queen, but that was a nice touch. The whole scene is phenomenal. If you somehow haven't seen it and don't want to do the quests, at least watch that. I don't think I've ever seen anyone knock this particular moment, which I think speaks to its strengths, especially given its presence in a fairly controversial expansion. Ysera is a character that everyone either likes or is at least neutral about, partly due to her limited screen time. Her death hit many players quite hard, and her salvation and revival here is both beautiful and a moment of great catharsis. It was a crescendo that was truly earned, which you can't always say about WoW writing. This is a watershed occasion, a very rare everybody liked that moment for WoW, and personally, I absolutely loved it. Enough that I can confidently say that since its release, it has remained my favorite questline in World of Warcraft. For this week's drawing, could you believe it, I decided to go with Ysera, specifically her dragonflight design, because this one actually gives her a little bit of individuality, instead of, being an Alexstrasza recolor. I really like the poofy arm sleeves and the collar, as well as the subtle elements showing that she is still tied to Ardenweald. In fact, the inclusion of those deep, bright blues made for some really nice accents. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about her use within Dragonflight. Like, they pretty much brought her back to do her usual thing of vague channeling to keep things stable, while the real reason she was actually there was to help her daughter, Marithra, properly accept and grow into her role as the new aspect of the dream. I'm not entirely sure it landed, I still don't care that much about Marithra, but I can appreciate that it contributed to Dragonflight's overall theme of family. And because I'd already used Lady Moonberry for my Ardenweald drawing, I decided to put Ysera in the Emerald Dream, which, is just a very gorgeous zone. Lots of spiral designs, lots of vibrant greenery, a magnificent skybox, and, I guess a big tree in the middle.
Well, I'm getting tired now for some reason. I think I'm gonna wrap it up now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Night night.